अस्सलाम वालेकुम। और बहनों, पाकिस्तान हासिल करने के लिए हमने बहुत कुर्बानी की है।
Pakistan having turned 75, the question that's most frequently asked is it actually per the vision of what its founder, quaid-e-azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, wanted? To which the next question, not asked as frequently, should be, well, what is it that Mr. Jinnah wanted, and what is Jinnah's Pakistan? Now, some people have a completely different perspective, which is that the founder's words were quite vague, quite inconsistent, and meant to please everyone. But that's just not true. Mr. Jinnah's words, especially during the last decade of his life, were completely clear, entirely consistent, and this was not really a man who wanted to please. So, to attempt to answer that question, what did Mr. Jinnah want? What does Jinnah's Pakistan look like? We're going to be consulting the words of the quaid-e-azam himself. Mr. Jinnah said in his famous address to the Constituent Assembly on 11th August 1947, "Remember that you are now a sovereign legislative body and you have got all the powers. It therefore places on you the gravest responsibility." A month before that, Mr. Jinnah had said, as regards adaptations to the law, that they would be subject to the supreme power of the Constituent Assembly, which can do anything it likes after the 15th of August. So all of this goes to show that Mr. Jinnah, who himself was a parliamentarian par excellence his entire life, right from the days of the Delhi Legislative Assembly, had always wanted a sovereign legislature, and that body was going to make all the laws. Now, it is true that Mr. Jinnah had wondered in his diary also whether a presidential system would be better suited. But private wanderings aloud versus actual policy statements made on a repeated basis, plus Mr. Jinnah's own life example, leaves it little in doubt that a parliamentary system is what is needed. Of course, what did we do? We said that the Constitution has certain salient features that only the Supreme Court can alter, and we ended up dissolving Parliament prematurely 8 out of 10 times. Number 2 is civilian supremacy. Mr. Jinnah said on 14th June 1948 at Quetta Staff College that he was disturbed by what some high-ranking officers had been saying, and he asked all the officers there to study the Constitution. He also said that they should read their oath. And it was then when he said that any command or orders that may come to you cannot come without the sanction of the executive head. This is the legal position. So that is the primary source, Mr. Jinnah's own statement. And then you also have a secondary source, which is Asad Khan Saab's book, We've Learned Nothing from History, in which Asghar Khan Saab places the statement on 14th August 1947 that he heard Mr. Jinnah reprimand Akbar Khan, who would go on to become part of the Rawalpindi conspiracy. And he said, "Never forget that you are the servants of the state. You do not make policy. It is we, the people's representatives, who decide how the country is to be run. Your job is to only obey the decisions of your civilian masters." So, secondary source, primary source. One fun fact, at Quetta Staff College in June of 1948, Yahya Khan was in the same place at the same time, our most disastrous chief of the future, but it is lost to history as to whether it was him who actually said this to Mr. Jinnah. As far as whether we were able to implement Mr. Jinnah's vision, civilian supremacy actually started eroding while he was alive, when he ordered General Douglas Gracie, the Commander-in-Chief of the Pakistan Army, to go into Kashmir to avert the massacre that had been starting on from Poonch onwards. General Gracie refused and committed an act that was tantamount to high treason.
आजाद रहें आप लोग,
इस मुल्क पाकिस्तान में अपनी अपनी इबादत गाहों, मस्जिदों या मंदिरों में जाने के लिए।
Number 3, minority rights. It's very true that freedom of religious expression may well make up the very genesis of Pakistan. In his most famous speech of 11th August 1947, Mr. Jinnah said to the Constituent Assembly, "You are free. You are free to go to your temples, you are free to go to your mosques, or to any other place of worship in this state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed. That has nothing to do with the business of the state." And on this theme, Mr. Jinnah had been consistent throughout the duration of his career, from the Lucknow Pact to the 14 points, the Pakistan resolution, and finally to the 11th August speech to the Constituent Assembly. Now, the very fact that Mr. Jinnah had been emphasizing minority rights got actual physical expression in his cabinet, in which the highest ranking portfolios were also accorded to religious minorities. What have we done since then? Pakistan is a place where not only forced conversions but sectarian attacks and discriminatory laws are all very much in vogue. It was only after Pakistan not only fought its war against militancy, but certain Supreme Court judgments cancelling out retrograde judgments in the past, like Chief Justice Asad Hussain Gilani's suo motu of 2014, in which he expanded freedom of religious expression and also cited Mr. Jinnah's vision that Pakistan was able to somehow come to some sort of fight back as far as minority rights are concerned. The current situation is still deplorable. Long before Zulfikar Ali Bhutto arrived on the scene, it was actually Mr. Jinnah that used the expression Islamic Socialism. Not only was he a frequent critic of Western economic models and capitalism, but he also said in 1944 that it was not their job to make the rich richer or to allow the accumulation of wealth in a few hands. But Mr. Jinnah's economic views were more nuanced than advocating straight out socialism. He didn't see it in a coercive way. In fact, he often lamented that the large industrial groups were not Muslim. What he said was that there would be state intervention in certain key industries, and that the goal was to level up the general living standard of the masses, to use the words that Mr. Jinnah used. So not only was his economic model something of a mixed system, but it emphasized not only social welfare but upward social mobility, and that the rich should not be allowed to become richer still. The Western economic model had to accommodate principles of Islamic social justice. There's also the burning question of whether Mr. Jinnah wanted a secular state or a theocracy. He expressly ruled out the latter, saying that Pakistan would not be ruled by priests with a divine mission. But it would also be difficult to think that Mr. Jinnah saw any contradiction between principles of Islamic social justice and a vibrant, dynamic parliamentary democracy. He never actually used the word secular in any express context when it came to Pakistan, but his substantive views, which are that Pakistan would be a forward-thinking, industrious and progressive state where freedom of religious expression, which we've already discussed, but also rights for women and equality of women and women's participation in the workforce would receive free reign. And so all of these points really paint a fairly forward-thinking picture of the quaid-e-azam. One overlooked aspect of Mr. Jinnah's policy while he was actually in charge of Pakistan was what he did for Uziristan. Not only did he order the withdrawal of all troops from the forward areas, but it was also considered an unprecedented policy change from the a British attempt to use Uziristan as a buffer zone against the Russians as part of a larger great game. In fact, Mr. Jinnah said that we want you to stand on your own legs, and he emphasized education and said we would not be interfering in your own hard-won freedoms, and appreciated the support that the tribal areas had lent to the cause of Pakistan. What did we do? We actually perpetuated various British policies in the Northwest all the way to 2018, when we finally got rid of the FCR. Had Mr. Jinnah lived longer, there can be little doubt in terms of just how radically he was withdrawing all troops from Uziristan, that would have happened. There is a school of revisionist thought that says Mr. Jinnah actually never wanted a separate Pakistan. He actually was using the cry of Pakistan as a bargaining chip so that he could get a better deal for all Muslims in a united India. This unfortunately goes against the vast documentary evidence, speeches and statements of Mr. Jinnah during the last 10 years of his life, in which he is expressly saying that this is not a counter for bargaining. He is expressly saying that this is Congress propaganda. He is expressly saying that the only thing that they want is independence and separate states. Now, Mr. Jinnah said in 1943, which is perhaps his greatest speech after his speech of 11th August 1947, that is to say, his Muslim League presidential address, that the idea of a loose federation, which is what this theory is based on, that Mr. Jinnah actually wanted a loose federation, was not to be followed up on, because in any loose federation, a strong center would pulverize, that's the word he used, pulverize the power of the units and keep on tightening and tightening until it would have no more powers left. And as far as the cabinet mission plan is concerned, Mr. Jinnah had grounded that plan too in plans of just secession. He said that they would only follow secession even after accepting the cabinet mission plan. In fact, the Muslim League's acceptance of the plan was rooted in the principle of separation for an independent Pakistan. So to say that Pakistan was actually a bargaining chip is actually a massive disservice, not only to the historical record, but to Mr. Jinnah's will as a politician, but also as a popular leader. And there's a very long article on the subject, should you choose to read it. In those early days when Pakistan was uncertain whether it would last much longer, Mr. Jinnah called provincialism a curse. Especially, he said, when your state is so new and when it faces such tremendous problems, internal and external. But it was likely that centralizing impulse that led Mr. Jinnah to his most controversial action when he declared that Urdu would be the state language in East Pakistan. They could have Bengali as the provincial language, but Urdu would be the state language. Now, some historians make a distinction between state language and national language, arguing that Mr. Jinnah never used the expression national language in his speech in East Pakistan, East Bengal at that time. But having said that, this would become one of the many symptoms that powered the Bengali language movement, which saw its tragic climax in February of 1952. It was Karachi, of course, that Mr. Jinnah wanted as his capital city. The fact that a military ruler decided to make the fictional city of Islamabad the capital instead, which also magically happened to be near his ancestral village, is perhaps a subject for another time. So to wrap up, Mr. Jinnah wanted a parliamentary system, he wanted freedom of religious expression, he wanted a strong industrial base with a redistributive element, he wanted demilitarization from Uziristan, he wanted a strong center, and he wanted a progressive and forward-leaning country in which, of course, one of the salient principles, civilian supremacy, was not adhered to during his lifetime. So that is what Mr. Jinnah wanted in his own words.